Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we rematch with the notorious Martinfish, now in 3.0 edition. Stockfish will play 3 moves, Martin gets 1 turn, and then so on. As requested, instead of just walking you guys through the game review, you guys will join me live today in this game. Please let me know in the comments if you guys like this way better, because it's a lot more setup and editing for me, but I'm happy to do it if you guys prefer it, so let me know down in the comments. Alright, I have Martin and Stockfish pulled up, and we'll follow the game on this board. I'll start with d4. Stockfish has elected knight to f6, and for me this is just a normal London system. I'll play bishop to f4. Alright, for the second move we get pawn to d5, and so far so good. I'll just play e3. And for its third move, Stockfish has chosen e6, so I will play e6. Martin is up next, and I do have the option to try to make things complicated or funky in some way, or kind of YOLO the position, but that already went a little bit sideways last time, so I'd rather play just a comfortable game and let Martin mess up whenever Martin is going to mess up, and just hope to God that Stockfish doesn't run me over before that happens. I don't think it'll happen in the opening though, because so far this is just extremely solid, extremely symmetrical, so I will just play knight to f3, and await Martin's turn. Okay, Martin didn't play a bad move here, but he's decided to play pawn to h5, which actually almost looks like a Stockfishy kind of move, because Stockfish does sometimes like these lateral pawn storms, especially when I play the bishop to f4 and then later block it from going back. Sometimes Stockfish actually plays stuff like this, but in this case, this is just a plain old Martin move. I'm just going to continue my development. This isn't enough of a mistake for me to actually capitalize on yet, and that's really what I'm waiting for. And I think I can hold off Stockfish long enough to take advantage of whenever Martin makes like an actual mistake in the position. So I'll play bishop to d3 here. All right, back to Stockfish, and Stockfish decides to play pawn to c5. And like you guys already know, whenever I see c5, it's going for the d4 pawn. I always play pawn to c3. So no different this time. I'll play pawn to c3 here. All right, for its second move, Stockfish decides to play queen to b6, which is already quite annoying. I will say this about the engine. When engine plays c5 and queen to b6, you know that you're in trouble. Versus human players will play c5 and sometimes not even play queen to b6. And it's just because that's the opening they know how to play. It's tension in the center or whatever. But Stockfish actually knows how to follow through on this kind of stuff. We had this exact same position, I think, in one of my recent videos. I don't even know if it was against Stockfish, but all of my videos are engine videos. So it was one of these engine videos. And I talk about always how I like to play knight to a3, but that only works if the bishop is still on f1. And the idea is queen takes b2, knight to b5, which protects c3, and there's this c7 threat. After knight to a6 defending the c7 threat, you just play rook to b1, queen takes, rook to a1, queen back, rook back to b1, and then it's like a forced draw. Unfortunately, in this position, knight to a3, walks into c4, hitting the bishop, and with that extra tempo, you just drop the b2 pawn for free. And then there's no knight to b5 because the c4 pawn, in that case, intercepts it. So I'll just play this the normal way and play queen to c1, protecting the pawn. And we'll see what Stockfish does for its third move. All right, Stockfish elects to play bishop to d6 for the third move, which is actually super normal. Normally, there's like some ideas of like knight to c6, bishop d7, rook c8. And then this pawn is kind of under attack. Knight to b4 could happen because this pawn is pinned, and it can get kind of complicated quickly. But this is a pretty normal move. Normally, I would play bishop to g3, looking to trade bishops and then open up the file for my rook. But the problem is here, bishop g3 doesn't look comfortable against an engine with a pawn on h5, to be honest. I'm sure I could get away with it, but somehow this makes me uncomfortable. So the other option is for me to trade, which I would be happy with. I would be happy with trading, simplifying the position, and then like knight to d2. Only problem is after that, you basically give up control of the e5 square, so there's ideas of just like knight c6, e5, which I guess I could stop with knight to f3 or maybe even f4, but that seems really aggressive when I haven't even castled and my queen is back on c1. It is Martin's turn next, so I could just play knight to e5, which is what I would play against a human player, and the only reason I'm kind of not excited about playing that against Stockfish is because normally it can handle that tension really well. But Martin might not handle it all that well, so I'll play knight to e5 here. Okay, and as expected, Martin is just so creative. Martin decides to play rook to f8 in this position. Yeah, no comment on rook to f8. Stockfish is probably throwing its fists in the air because it can't castle anymore. And it's funny because one of you guys commented that if Stockfish ever becomes sentient, it's going to come after me for making it play on a team with Martin. I'll continue with normal development, knight to d2. Now I'm really not scared of Stockfish because it can't even castle anymore. And we'll see what Stockfish has to say after looking at this position again. Okay, Stockfish decides to play queen to c7. I'm not sure what it's trying to line up here, but for whatever reason, it decided to play queen to c7. And for me, that's not anything concerning, so I'll just go ahead and castle. And we'll see what the idea was behind queen to c7. Right, so I was just overthinking it apparently because Stockfish decided to play knight b to d7, which I guess this whole idea was just pressure on e5, which makes total sense, but kind of the point of bringing the knight out through d2 is to land it on f3. So I'm going to play knight to f3, fortifying that control over the e5 square. And we'll see what Stockfish has to say. All right, Stockfish decides to play knight to g4, which is actually really uncomfortable because now I have 3 defenders on e5. Stockfish, or well, Martinfish, I guess, has 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers, and there's no way for me to add more defenders to this knight. I guess my only choice is to trade it off. So like knight takes d7, for example. If queen takes, we're totally fine. That's just an even position, even trades. If takes, then I just pick up the rook. Oh, wait. Yeah, I pick up the rook, but bishop takes h2, and I can't take back because queen takes and then mate. But then just king to h1 is fine, I think. Maybe even g3, trap the bishop. Maybe not g3 because the bishop could sack. But after king to h1, I think I'm fine. I don't see how Martinfish would actually follow through on that. So I'm going to play that. I'm going to take on d7. I forgot that it was actually Martin's turn, but I was about to input it into Stockfish, and then I realized that it's actually Martin's turn. I have it up on my whiteboard, so I remember whose turn is when on like what move. But anyways, Martin actually decides to take on f4, which is totally fine, but kind of scary that it didn't that Martin didn't just blunder. Because honestly, I was expecting Martin to just completely blunder, but he takes on f4, which is the line we calculated, which is totally fine. We'll take on f8. All right, and Stockfish decides to take on h2, which makes perfect sense. If I take, it's mate. So the only move for me is to move my king over, and then I'm assuming that Stockfish will just take back my knight, but we'll see. Right, obviously Stockfish takes back my knight, and question is, how do I actually get this off of me? Because Martinfish, I'm going to call it Martinfish because I guess they're playing together. They haven't completed their development yet, but I'm not completely comfortable with this on top of my king. I was even considering knight to e5 and just sacrificing the pawn, but I don't want to give up my center that easily. And I've noticed that my queen is like super misplaced. So I was thinking I could play queen to d1. And my idea here is knight to e5. If takes backs with the knight at any point, I can just pick up the pawn on h5. And if knight to e5 takes, queen takes, it's not great for me, but I could just play like, I guess g3, and then queen to f3. And that should be fine. That should be fine for me. So I'll play that. I'll play queen to d1. We'll see what Stockfish has to say for its last move before Martin. All right, we get bishop to d6 by Stockfish. And I know it's Martin's turn next, so I am extremely confident in knight to e5. I mean, obviously, Martin might figure out that he needs to take with the bishop, and then Stockfish takes with the queen, and then we're back to that position anyways, and I guess g3, queen to f3 looks fine to me. But it's Martin, so I have my fingers crossed that he'll give us a slam dunk. I'll play knight to e5 here, and we'll see what Martin has to say. Okay, nice. Martin decides to play a6, protecting the very weak b5 pawn, and giving me the knight on g4, which I will just take with my eyes closed. It's back to Stockfish, but... All right, Stockfish decides to capture with the pawn, and I will just capture the free pawn. Oh, I just realized e5, but I guess I could play bishop to f5. I'm playing too fast. Okay, let's see what Stockfish has to say about that. All right, Stockfish instead decides to play g6, which I would be lying if I told you I completely understood, because I don't understand it really. Even the bishop isn't getting there anytime soon, so I'm not really sure what it's for. Maybe king to g7 at some point, I guess. I'd love to play f4 here. It's definitely the natural move, controlling the e5 square. And I really want to close off the center because what I have is an extra rook. Or rather, the exchange, sorry. I'm up the exchange, so I'd like to put my rooks on the open h file, but I really don't want to give Martinfish the chance to open up these diagonals for its bishops. So I could play f4, but the problem is I walk into e5 with discovered attack on my queen. So what I could do is play queen to h4. And in some other multiverse, Stockfish is actually the bad one and plays bishop d7, and then I pick up the rook. But in this multiverse, queen to h4 sets up the queen on the open file, and then just kind of sets up f4 without this same discovered attack. So I'll play that. I'll play queen to h4. We'll see what Stockfish has to say about that. Cool, Stockfish plays king to g7, which makes perfect sense. Covers these squares. And I'll continue with my plan. f4, no more discovered attack, and it's Martin's turn. So we'll see what Martin wants to play here. Okay, it's not that bad. Martin plays a pretty tame move. He plays rook to b8, which for Martin, pretty solid, honestly. All Martin has to do is make a neutral move every time it's his turn, and Stockfish will probably take the wheels and crush. So I'm still kind of waiting on a bigger mistake. We've picked up a pawn and the exchange earlier in the game, but against Stockfish, that's not an awful lot. I will say our position is better for sure. We have control over the center, we have an open file, and this is just, for me, this is undeveloped, basically. So I'm happy with the position, and I think everything lends towards a kingside attack here. The king is basically by himself, and all of Martinfish's pieces are on the queen side. I'd like to play, I think, g4, king g2, rook to h1 is the most natural way to go about it. That way I just pick up the whole open file, and I move my king out of the way, and I throw a pawn in its face, maybe looking for f5 at some point. So I'll play g4 here, and we'll see what Stockfish has to say after seeing rook to b8. All right, Stockfish plays bishop d7 with, I guess, this little sneaky idea, which kind of falls in line with my plan because I was going to play king g2 anyways. So I will play king to g2, getting him off the file, and setting up rook to h1. Back to Stockfish. Okay, so Stockfish decides to play rook to h8, which makes perfect sense, trying to fight for the open file, hitting the queen so it's with tempo. I guess the natural move here is queen g3, but this is like a little too obvious, and g5 is probably not the best for me. So I'll play queen to f2 instead. Yeah, I'll play queen to f2, and Stockfish has one more move before it's back to Martin, so we'll see. All right, Stockfish decides to play bishop to e7. I'm assuming the plan is to reroute the bishop, or maybe reroute the bishop like this. I'm not sure, but I guess it does make sense because the bishop wasn't all that well placed, staring into basically a wall of pawns. So I'll continue with my plan, rook to h1, fighting for the open file, and I have one more rook than he does. He has another bishop that I don't have, but the center is closed, so it doesn't count for all that much. So I just need to take advantage of this open file. And it's back to Martin. All right, Martin, honestly, is playing pretty good. Martin decided to play rook to c8, which is kind of a human move here. Instead of trading off and letting me just seize the open file completely, he keeps the rook on the board and avoids the trade, which honestly to me makes perfect sense. My plan is still the same, though. I need to double down on this open file, so I'm going to play rook to h2 with the plan of rook to h1, and then just, I don't know, find my way in there. So I'll play rook to h2 here, and it's back to Stockfish now. All right, Stockfish decided to play rook to g8, which is fine, I guess. I guess what it doesn't want is the king to have to go back, and then the 8th rank is weak after. So instead it plays rook to g8, probably looking for king to f8, maybe bishop to f6, which is a lot stronger. None of that changes my plan, so I'm going to play rook a to h1 and hand it back over to Stockfish. Okay, Stockfish plays c takes d4, which I'm sure makes sense to the fish somehow. But to me, it's just an extra move where Stockfish doesn't really do anything, and we inch closer to Martin's next move. So I'm just going to recapture. Stockfish has one more move before it's Martin's turn. And we get king to f8, which, yeah, basically what we talked about, putting the king behind the rook for this 8th rank invasion, but not really making any forward progress. Not that I'm arguing there is a way to do that here necessarily. So I could play rook to h8 right now. Takes king g7. I can't play queen to h4 because of the bishop. Oh, maybe that's what the bishop was there for, to stop the queen from coming in. That makes a lot of sense. But I could play queen to f3, queen to h3. But then I have my queen behind my rook, and I want my queen in front of my rook after I trade this one off. So I'm going to play queen to f3 first, with the idea of rook to h8 and then queen to h3. We'll play that. Queen to f3, and it's Martin's turn. We'll see what Martin has to say about this. All right, Martin's decided to play bishop to d6, which, this is solid. This is really solid. Well, for Martin, it's solid. I don't know. To me, it's solid too, but for Martin, it's definitely super solid. We've got the battery back in play. The f4 pawn is weak. It just is. I hadn't even noticed that, to be honest, but the f4 pawn is objectively weak, and it's pinned to my rook on h4, or h2, sorry, so I don't even have the option to play f5 here. I guess I'm fine with giving up this pawn. I could just play rook to h8. Takes king to h3. And that doesn't really change that much in the position for me. So I'm going to play rook to h8 and see what Stockfish has to say about mating threats back here. All right, Stockfish is being super annoying as usual and plays queen to b6 for the second time in this game, hitting the weak b2 pawn. And it's really annoying because I literally just played queen to f3 to play h3. And now it feels like my queen needs to be on b2 again, or rather defending b2. I'm going to eat up one of its tempos by taking on g8, which is what I wanted to do anyways. So I'll take with check. I'm assuming Stockfish knows what the move is here. Right, Stockfish decides to take back, as expected. And now it's back to me to deal with the b2 pawn. Obviously, I could play queen to f2. And then I'm assuming Stockfish would play bishop to e7, and then we're kind of back to square one because I can't come in through h4. I could get like super creative and play like king to f3, queen h2. But at the same time, I actually want to win this game, and this seems just a little bit aggressive with the king. I could play b3, which is kind of a natural stopping move, but then I walk into queen to a5. Hitting a2, hitting c3, a4, queen takes, and I can't even discover check it because there's the g6 pawn. Makes you wonder if Stockfish sees stuff like that. I don't know, I just feel like sometimes when I see things that just happen to not work by like one move way later, I'm like, I wonder if the engine could have seen that. It's possible. It's funny, I hadn't considered this move at first, but it might actually work, which is b4. And it just barely works because it holds on to a5, and obviously it's protected now by the c3 pawn, which buys me, I think, just enough to follow through on my attack. So I'm going to play that. I'm going to play b4. Oh, and it's Martin's turn next. Does that change anything? Should I play something different? Because this is what I would play against a human and definitely against Stockfish. I don't think there's any better opportunities for me here, or rather traps that I can set, really. So I'll just play b4 in this position. We'll see what Martin has to say about that. Okay, so Martin is, I guess, done with playing this game because Martin decided to play queen takes b4, which is bad for a very obvious reason. And I'm going to take back and pray to God that Stockfish never becomes sentient, because if I have to explain this to Stockfish why I put it in this situation, I'm never going to get out of there alive. Anyways, back to Stockfish. We'll see what Stockfish has to say about this move. Okay, I guess Stockfish reluctantly plays bishop to f8. The best move for whatever reason, covering the weak dark squares. I guess anticipating queen here, and that makes sense. After king to f8, if the queen is on f7, there's no way for me to actually follow through on the attack. But this is easy peasy now. I just blast open the king side, and, you know, all hell breaks loose at that point. We'll play f5 and see what Stockfish says. All right, Stockfish actually decided to capture, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't expect it to lean into trading off the pieces. But I guess what better choice did it even have? So I'll take on f5, see what Stockfish plays. right, Stockfish decides to recapture, which this is a no-brainer for me. Bishop takes f5, trading off pieces, blowing up the king side. And Stockfish has one more move before it's back to Martin, which is offensive to even say to Stockfish that Martin gets to keep playing after queen takes b4. But it's true. Stockfish here decides to actually trade, which is super interesting. I feel like Stockfish generally keeps pieces on the board because it just provides more opportunities and it sees stuff that I will never see. But here it actually decides to trade. I will take back. And it's Martin's turn. Okay, this is just an insult to Stockfish at this point. Martin decides to play bishop to h6, which is horrendous, and I will just take it. I'll take it and give it back to Stockfish, who's going to try his best to save this game. All right, Stockfish decides to play king to f8, and the easiest way that I see to make checkmate here is queen f6, cover these two squares and mate. I could also go for ladder's mate, which is funny. Some of you guys have commented that like I always go for ladder's mate. And I actually don't always go for ladder's mate, but it always ends up that way. So I go for it if it's, you know, the best way to checkmate in that position. So I will try my best to change it up this time. I'm going to play queen to f6 and go for back rank, which is basically what that is. I'll play queen to f6. And it's back to Stockfish. All right, Stockfish plays king to e8, which is a good try. I would play check here, check. But then Martinfish just kind of gets away, so it makes more sense for me to just play rook to h7 and then just check and then mate. So I'll play rook to h7. Curious to see here what Stockfish plays. Okay, Stockfish is off the rails because Stockfish here played a5, and I'm not sure what calculation it did here, but for whatever reason it thought this was going to give it the best chance of survival. I'm going to go ahead and take on f7. And funny enough, Martin gets to do the honors in this game. I swear he got to do the honors, I think, in the first game as well. But anyways, queen takes f7, and Martin gets to play the only move. Right, Martin plays king to d8, which actually I just realized I didn't need to run it through there. It's the only move. We're 40 moves deep. I'm kind of dizzy at this point. Martin plays king to d8, and we'll finish the game off with checkmate. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Again, please let me know down below in the comments if you guys prefer this format, because I will continue to do it, but I'd like the feedback. And I'll see you guys in the next video.